John Irving's new novel is titled Avenue of Mysteries. Please give him a warm Talking Volumes welcome. You did say that backstage, that it didn't take as much begging and nudging to get you here as I thought it did.
It was someone else's problem that I was coming here. I don't know who it was.
I'm just glad you're here.
I remember there was a problem, but it wasn't my problem. There are a lot of places I have a problem going, but this isn't one of those towns.
Where are those places you have a problem
That would
going?
be really stupid for me to say.
And why? I was listening to that NPR story where the reporter came up to Toronto and followed you around, I think while you were grocery shopping and doing some other things.
That was strange, wasn't it?
And then,
Yeah.
well, it was insightful. And in the interview, you talked about something that you've talked about a few times over the years, which is writing into the things that you fear. And the thing that I'm curious about is whether the things that you fear have changed over the years.
No. You don't get to pick those things. There's a lot about writing a novel that you would think is an exercise in free choice, more free choice than most of us have in our so-called real lives. But you don't get to choose what wakes you up at 4 a.m. You don't get to choose your nightmares. You don't get to choose what you're afraid of that chooses you when you're tired or a little worn down. Those things find you. And in my case, and I don't think I'm original, they find me recurrently. They come back. Thomas Mann once said that repetition for a writer was the result of having something worthwhile to say. Well, I don't dispute that, but then there are the things that aren't in the area of themes, but more in the area of obsessions. Fear is like comedy. You can't choose to be comic if you're not funny. We all have friends who try, but there's a penalty to being comic, which is you will be, even inappropriately. If you see things in a comic way, you will persist in seeing them that way, even in areas of life that many people don't find funny. Writing about sex also affects other people in ways you can't control. But actually being funny about things that other people think are sacred or too serious to be funny about makes people angrier. Salman Rushdie had a death threat put on his head because he told a joke. That's what that was. It was a joke. Things just come out that way. Shakespeare was funny in his tragedies. He couldn't help it. It just comes out. Well, fear is like that. You don't control those things.
you use the word obsession. Do you use that in the sense of, I wish I could write through this and, dispel it in some ways? Or have you learned to kind of embrace the obsession?
I really don't know where the idea that writing about something is cathartic comes from. That has never been my experience or why I do it. I've never entertained the illusion that if I write about something I hate, it will necessarily go away. That's a problem. I don't. Perhaps if your subject is only yourself, if your fiction is only based on your own experiences, or if you've had the kind of life where you've had truly traumatizing and life-changing or life-arresting moments, well, of course, I sympathize. Why you might want to expel those demons and why you might even think that writing about them could bring about a kind of catharsis. I just can't imagine it.
Have you had some of those life-arresting moments?
No, I've had an exceedingly boring life.
You say that. I had a feeling you might say that. Can that really be?
Yes. I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining at all. I think it's actually an advantage to me as a fiction writer that there's truly nothing in my personal life that I hold so sacred that I must write about it the way it was. There are many things in my life experience that I can use in my writing, and I feel completely free to change them every time I write about them, to make them different. And usually when I change things, what I mean by that is I make them worse. But perhaps if there had been some calamity, especially in my formative years, which is so often the case in the characters in my novels.
Right.
I love those formative years as a fiction writer. I neither particularly loved nor detested mine. Nothing much happened. Again, I'm not complaining. And I think, therefore, I'm free of the tyranny that memoir can sometimes exert on writing fiction. It's really very simple if you're not basing a novel, a story you're making up, if you're not basing it on your experience, that is, what's happened to you. Well, here's how it works. You try to think of characters that you would feel more than ordinary sympathy for in situations that you would feel most sympathetic for these characters to be caught in. And I try to make you sympathetic to these characters, even love them occasionally, but certainly like them. Because if you don't love them or like them, you won't care what I do to them. It won't matter. You'll just get bored, as I do when I think of my life. So, it's not a trick. It's just I want you to care about a character or two, and as soon as I feel I've sufficiently set that stage, I want you to start worrying about what's going to happen to them. Because I am a worst-case scenario writer. I mean, who the hell reads best-case scenario writers? Okay, maybe that's what YA books are for or something, but I'm not into it.
When is enough enough in the worst case?
Well, I wouldn't put any restraints on that.
Yeah. Why?
Here's another way to say it. My novels wait a long time before I even begin to write them, often for many more years than it will take to finish them once I start. And I don't write quickly. Last year in Twisted River waited 20 years before I began it, and then it took another 4 to write. That's a record. The more common waiting period of time is somewhere between 5 and 8 years. The longest time it ever took for me to write a novel was 7. The shortest time it ever took for me to write a novel was this one, Avenue of Mysteries, which I began on Christmas Eve 2011 as a novel and finished in early December of 2014. 3 years is preternaturally short for me, but that's misleading, and I'm sure we'll say more about that later, because this novel had an existence as something else for many years before I saw the novel in it. That's what makes it different, and that's also why when I saw it as a novel, the writing of it was so quickly forthcoming. Well, I've said many times that I need to know everything about an ending before I will even think about beginning a novel, and that takes some time. But in addition to knowing what the ending is, I don't mean only what happens. I mean the voice it's in, how it sounds, not just what the last sentence is, but many of the surrounding paragraphs to that last sentence, so that there's a tone of voice to that ending, and I'm writing toward it. Maybe this comes from being an actor in school and in college. You really don't know how to sound on stage unless you know how you're going to sound with the last thing you have to say, because you don't want to sound that way too soon. You've got to get there. So you don't want to blow the way you sound in your end lines. You got to set it up. Well, I feel that way about telling a story. But in addition to an ending, I have to know something else, and that goes directly to the fear and obsession thing, and to what's too much or not. There has to be something in the novel that I am dreading writing. There has to be something in this story that I will put off and procrastinate about getting to for the longest time. If there isn't something in this story that truly sickens me, I don't know why I'm bothering. I don't know how I can expect emotionally and psychologically to affect you if I'm not affected. So if I don't feel a little sick about something, I wonder what could possibly be in it for you. Because I don't do happy endings. I just don't.
This kind of comes back to where we started, though. Does the line for that dreaded scene or what's going to sicken you, has it moved? I mean, do you find yourself venturing into territory that you might have shied away from in the early days of your writing?
I don't think so. I noticed when I began reading and found those things that I love so much as a reader that I wanted to be able to write novels like that. When that happened to me, I was 14, 15, 16 years old. And I thought, well, it didn't take long for me to discover that people who had, writers who had an effect on readers of that kind also had enemies. I can't think of a novelist who is loved for being a centrist. It just doesn't come up. Maybe Hemingway, because his sentences are so short and repetitive and uninteresting. Maybe that's, and he indeed is loved. He's revered. He's worshipped. I despise him. And I always did. I always did. But the writers I loved, I found that either other people loved them or they hated them. There was no... The writers I loved were never people who brought forth the response, "Oh yeah, he's okay." I never heard that. I never heard that. It was, "How do you stand that?" Or, "Oh yes, I love it." Well, that's why I think the one thing I know was never a guidepost to my writing when I was young or now that I'm older is what other people call good taste. I would shoot myself if I thought I had it. If you're afraid of that, find another line of work. If you start out censoring yourself, don't worry. There'll be plenty of people who'll do it to you. You don't have to do it to yourself. So I always felt that I was the barometer of what was too much. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if an editor or a copy editor is suggesting to me how I can make something more clear, I pay close attention. If an editor or a copy editor is telling me structurally that I might want to hide this revelation a little longer or let that revelation out a little sooner, all the structural, architectural things, all the syntactical things, all the things about sentences themselves. I don't necessarily do what an editor or a copy editor advises me to do, but I listen, I pay close attention, and especially if he or she is saying something that one of my young assistants has noted when he or she was transcribing my various drafts, or that my wife, who's usually my first reader, was my publisher when I met her, is my agent now. I might dismiss what anybody says, but if two people say it, then I begin to think it wasn't an individual aberration. This is to say, I listen. But when someone puts their finger on something that's offensive or potentially offensive, I quickly say, to you? Were you offended? And when they say, no, I'm just saying that I wasn't offended, but I'm just saying that surely someone will be offended. When I hear that, I say, good. Because if you're afraid about someone, I just don't know what you're in it for. Write advertising copy. Do that. Novels aren't advertising copy. You gotta, or let's put it another way. There's an obnoxious little logo on the front page of the New York Times. It's been there forever. All the news that's fit to print. That's not what novels are about. Novels are the news an individual thought you should hear. Nobody else is telling you what's fit about it. I had a copy, I'm very fortunate that I've had the same copy editor for a long time. Most people aren't lucky enough to hang on to a copy editor for as long as I've held on to this woman. She was my copy editor for The Cider House Rules, my 6th novel, and we're still working together. We hate each other some of the time. We've had many fights and quarrels and hung up on each other and things like that, but we understand each other pretty well. And there was one of my novels where she said that maybe she was 300-400 pages into the manuscript, and she made a little note in the margin, having circled a word. The word was penis, and she said, "Do you want me to tell you how many times you've used this word?" And when I sent the copy edited manuscript back to her, I circled her note and said, "If you call this to my attention, I'll use it more." And when she sent it back, she circled what I wrote and said, "I knew you'd say that." Well, does that help?
Are you asking me if that helps? Back to despising Hemingway. Yeah.
No.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Why? I don't want to waste my time talking about
just
it.
Briefly, style, themes, language, what?
Stiff upper masculine lip shit. Can we begin with that? I mean, can we begin with courage? Oh, Jesus. I cannot enumerate the ways, and I didn't come here to talk about one of my least favorite writers.
Fair enough. One of the themes that goes through the novel is this idea of how time shifts through dreams. And at one point, our narrator in the novel says, "Dreams edit themselves. Dreams are ruthless with details." What does that mean?
Well, I think I've said that in different ways. I keep trying to get it right, I guess. I think I've said that in different ways over many novels now. I'm remembering in Owen Meany, I said, the way I said that was, your memory is a monster. You don't have a memory, it has you. That's another way to say the same thing. This is a novel about a man who has something so overwhelming happen to him when he is 14 and his sister is 13. So overwhelming and inexplicable, so mysterious and indelible, that nothing in the rest of his life will ever touch it or match it. And as he gets older, he lives more vividly at that time in his life and in that part of his past than he lives in the present. And I do my best to give you the impression that between the time you meet him as an older man, 54, looking 64, moving as if he were 74, I give you strongly the impression between this trip he's taking in his later life and his dreams and memories of what happened to him in Mexico at the age of 14, as if those were the only two lives he's had. They're about the only two lives you see. His life in Mexico at the age of 14, which is easily half the book, and indelibly the most important half, and what is developing, is happening, will happen to him on this trip he's taking to the Philippines. In between the 40 intervening years between his leaving Mexico and never going back and his embarking for the Philippines, there's very little of it. There's very little of it. There's only one designated chapter concerning the death of his adoptive parents, people who loved him and people he loved. Beyond that chapter, there's very little. So this goes back to what I said about how much I'm attracted, repeatedly attracted, to finding an event, a moment, a calamity, a trauma in a young life. Something happens to one of my younger characters, let's say between the age of 12 and 13 and 15, that age, the threshold age, the puberty years, the passage from childhood to adolescence or adolescence to adulthood, that age. When something happens to you around that time, it can be formative to who you become for the rest of your life, who you will be as an adult. I like that situation, obviously.
The way Juan Diego moves back and forth in time in these dream states and in this journey that he's taking made me remember that neuroscience that says when you retrieve memories, every time you retrieve a memory, you change it somehow. And that if you think about that long enough, you start to think, well, how much of that memory is real and how much of it is the way I feared that it happened, the way I wanted it to happen? You see what I'm asking?
I do. When I tell stories from my boring life, I change them all the time. Simply because it's something to do. But again, to stress, really to stress the point here, you can't do that to something that took you by the throat. You can't do that to something that has a permanent hold on your heart. That story you don't change. That story stays the same. That's like the dream you get at 4 o'clock in the morning. That doesn't change. That one. Well, I always look for those things, that's all. Having been largely, blessedly free of them in my quote-unquote real life. I don't want to make you think I hate my real life. I'm very happy with my life. I'm just not as material or as something to write about. No thanks.
So you don't think that something arresting happens in your life at 12, 13, 14? And
You mean generally to all
in
of
general,
us?
yeah, in general. And
If it happened to me, I missed it.
you spend, no, not you, but in general. And you spend the rest of your life, as this character does and as some of your other characters do, wrestling with what it means. And you don't think that you imbue a memory like that with, additional fear or importance or trauma? I mean, because I'm thinking about what you just said. It happened, you remember it exactly as it happened. I don't know if that's true, even in something that's deeply traumatic.
You may be applying a kind of nonfiction to what I think is the way imaginative stories work. Doubtless the most famous of the Greek classical tragedies, the Oedipus cycle, is 3 plays about what happened because of one thing. A guy kills his father without knowing it's his father, marries his mother without knowing she's his mother, and has children with her. I don't think Oedipus ever remembers that story a different way.
Well, I don't either.
And Sophocles got 3 plays out of it, and almost everyone's life was screwed as a result of it.
What can I say to
That'll
that?
teach you. As if you don't know that that's not something you'd want to do anyway. That'll show you. Hamlet comes home because his father died. He should have stayed away. He should have said, "Too bad." But he comes home, and that his father died, that's just the beginning. His dad's not only dead, his dad's a ghost. His dad's not only a ghost, but he's pissed off about the way he died. His mother is sleeping with his uncle. And Hamlet thinks it's his uncle when he kills his girlfriend's father. Can you imagine a trip home getting any worse? You come home as anyone would because your dad died. Well, and look at everything that happens. You think, oh, at least he has a girlfriend. How wonderful. Not that girlfriend. Keep her away from water. Too late. It just gets worse and worse. Now, I don't think Hamlet kept changing that story around. That's my point.
All right.
The rules of how you tell a story, how you dramatize the worst things that happen to us, are not necessarily the consensus of what happens to most of us in our real lives. David Copperfield makes an observation that's very similar to this. Copperfield is terribly disappointed as he grows up to discover that life is a lot sloppier, just messier than he expected. What gave him the idea that life was going to be better than he finds it? Children's stories. Good ones. Fairy tales. Something happens. Not a lot of extraneous detail. Everything is leading to something. Well, not everything in our lives leads to something, or even to anything. But I don't know about you, but I don't keep reading novels like that. I like to think, at least, that the author knows where he's going at least a chapter or two ahead of me. I like to be given the feeling that he always knew the whole thing. I saw King Lear when I was a kid who was too young to have read it. That is, I couldn't have handled the language. I don't remember how old I was, 13 or 14. I saw it in a town playhouse production because my stepfather was in it, and everybody went to the town playhouse because everybody knew everybody in the town. And some of them were better actors than others, and we actually liked seeing some of the worst actors, too. But I went to see King Lear for the first time before I knew anything about Shakespeare. I knew. Act 1, Scene 1, that the king was an idiot. And everyone in the audience knows. I couldn't understand half of the dialogue. Even I knew. Lear is wrong about everything that the audience instantly gets. Cordelia is the daughter who loves him. The other two are venal sluts. Not to put too fine a point on it. That's the story. Why then would we care? And I remember saying with some befuddlement to my stepfather after the play, you know, I don't get it. Everyone knows Lear's an idiot. I knew right from the beginning. Of course he's an idiot, my stepfather said. And I said, but why am I so affected by what happens to this fool? Because he is a fool. Why am I so affected? Well, my stepfather said, because he finds out he's wrong. He finds out that Cordelia has loved him, and Cordelia has loved him all along. And then, just before he dies, she does. And that hurts. Now, I don't care how many times you read that play. You know that play is written with the decisive foreknowledge of where it ends. You know. Is real life that neat? Not usually.
How about the first excerpt of the novel?
Okay. There's an epigraph to this novel from Shakespeare, from Twelfth Night. Journeys end in lovers' meeting. I love that play, I love that line, and it has, as you will see, a very striking meaning to the end of this novel. It's a good epigraph, it works. But I was tempted by another one. I buried it deep inside the book instead. It's not Shakespeare, it's from the Jeanette Winterson novel, The Passion, and it's a line I always love. As many times as I've read that novel, I always mark it. She says, "Religion is somewhere between fear and sex." Well, you kind of have to read The Passion to know what she's talking about. But that spoke to me, and it also would have been a terrific epigraph for this novel. I just like the Shakespeare better, perhaps because I was wedded to it soonest and couldn't let it go. Either one would have worked. There's even a chapter in this novel called Sex and Faith. And if I had to, in some idiot questionnaire, say in 2 words what this novel is about, I don't think I could do better than that. Sex and faith. Both. What do sex and faith have in common? I can tell you one thing. Each of them makes people do extraordinary things. Sex and faith make people do things that are even out of character. They drive you. They hold you up. They sustain you. They can get you in trouble, too. They're interesting. It's an interesting pair, but here's what happens, just to give you a small window. There's a moment early in the novel when the main character, as a 14-year-old, has had his foot crushed by a truck. He'll have a lifelong limp because of it. And the older man who cares most for him, he's a dump boss. He runs the basurero in Oaxaca. He's responsible for running over Juan Diego's foot. His name is Rivera. He brings Juan Diego to the Jesuit temple in Oaxaca and lays him at the feet of the statue of the Virgin Mary, hoping for a fix. It doesn't happen. And there's a moment when Juan Diego's pain abates. He's screaming, he's in a lot of pain. He wants to go to the doctor, not to the Virgin Mary. But Rivera is looking for the big fix. And in that instant that the pain goes away, he sees 2 women, mourners, all in black, kneeling in one of the early front pews. And not unusual to see in a church or a temple. But when he sees them simultaneously to the departure of his pain, he thinks for a second that he must be dying or he might be dead. And they're mourning him. And then as quickly as he could have that thought, the pain is back, he's screaming again. And when he looks again, the women have disappeared. Okay? 40 years later, when he takes this trip to the Philippines, he meets two women in an airport. He's a kind of helpless-looking guy, or perhaps because of looking older than he is, perhaps because of the limp, perhaps because he's not a very experienced man. These women take a kind of serious charge of him. They're veteran travelers. Whoever they are, they've been around the world a few times. A mother and her daughter. They're formidable. They both attract him. In the course of the novel, he will sleep with each of them. I don't recommend this, by the way. It's a bad idea, generally speaking. I hope you know that when you read a novel, the things that happen in novels are not necessarily recommendations. This would be one. But these women have a certain power and hold on him. And they remind him of some of the religious figures, the many virgins he grew up with as a child in Oaxaca. They have an almost spectral presence about them. Here they are in Hong Kong, on their way to the Philippines. Just a moment. The elongated passage to the Regal Airport Hotel at Hong Kong International was bedecked with an incomplete assortment of Christmas memorabilia, happy-faced reindeer, and Santa's elf laborer types, but no sleigh, no gifts, no Santa himself. Santa's getting laid. He probably called an escort service, Dorothy explained to Juan Diego. Enough sex, Dorothy, her mother cautioned the wayward-looking girl. From the testiness that infiltrated their seemingly more than mother-daughter banter, Juan Diego would have guessed this mother and daughter had been traveling together for years, improbably for centuries. Santa is definitely staying here, Dorothy said to Juan Diego. The Christmas shit is year-round. Dorothy, you're not here year-round, Miriam said. You wouldn't know. We're here enough, the daughter sullenly said. It feels like we're here year-round, she told Juan Diego. They were on an ascending escalator, passing a creche. The creche was surrounded by the usual cast of characters, humans and barn animals, only one exotic creature among the animals. And the miraculous Virgin Mary could not have been entirely human. Juan Diego had always believed this. Here in Hong Kong, she smiled shyly, averting her eyes from her admirers. At the creche moment, wasn't all the attention supposed to be paid to her precious son? Apparently not. The Virgin Mary was a scene stealer. Not only in Hong Kong, Juan Diego had always believed. There was Joseph, the poor fool, as Juan Diego thought of him. But if Mary truly was a virgin, Joseph appeared to be handling the childhood episode as well as could be expected. No fiery glances or suspicious looks at the inquisitive kings and wise men and shepherds, or at the manger's other gawkers and hangers-on, a cow, a donkey, a rooster, a camel. The camel, of course, was the one exotic creature. I'll bet the father was one of the wise guys, Dorothy offered. Enough sex, Dorothy, her mother said. Juan Diego wrongly surmised
he was alone in noticing that the Christ child was missing from the creche, or buried, perhaps smothered in all the hay. "The baby Jesus," he started to say, "someone kidnapped the holy infant years ago," Dorothy explained. "I don't think the Hong Kong Chinese care." "Maybe the Christ child is getting a facelift," Miriam offered. "Not everyone gets a facelift, Mother," Dorothy said. "That holy infant is no kid, Dorothy," her mother remarked. "Believe me, Jesus has had a facelift."
Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. Luck stopped and paid a visit, never stays for very long. She always comes and leaves her mark and decides when she's done. This time you found yourself on the other end of fair. Words were passed along as true, though you knew the weight they bared. Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. You've been holding on to silence like it's all that you have left. You've been swimming in the darkness since the day that she left, and all that you have now is blame and regret. In time you will learn to let go of that. Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. And don't move, don't worry now. You've done nothing wrong. You've done nothing wrong. So won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town. Won't you lay your troubles down? Leave them all behind you in this old London town.
That's the bellows. Aren't they great? Lou, thank you. You're listening to Talking Volumes at the Ted Mann Concert Hall at the University of Minnesota. John Irving is with us to talk about his new novel, Avenue of Mysteries, and I'm Kerri Miller. I've been thinking about what you said when you were introducing the excerpt about sex and faith driving people to do things that are out of character. And I was thinking, in the arc of a life, sometimes it's sex is the most powerful driver to do things out of character, and sometimes it's faith. And I wonder if you think, I don't know, age, passage of time, what comes to bear on the way those two things change someone?
I'm not being cynical. I think what really comes to bear is a little bit dependent on which disappoints you more. Yeah. Because it seems to me inevitable in most lives, in many lives, that one of them will. Sex or faith, take your pick. One of them will likely let you down, or feel insufficient, or you will feel just inadequate to it. In Avenue of Mysteries, there are two children who are really looking for the miracles they've been exposed to in some way repeat themselves. They want to believe. They're drawn to the miraculous, as many children are. What draws us to faith, what draws us to religion, in the case of almost every religion, is the miracle or miracles, the religious mysteries on which many, if not most, religions are based. It's the miracle of the story that compels us, or that we want to be somehow in possession of. Sometimes, often, the disappointingly man-made rules of a church, again, of any church, the policies of a church, and also man-made, the stuff about the institution, which represents a faith, sometimes that stuff gets in the way of our wanting contact with the miraculous. When this novel begins, Juan Diego's little sister, Lupe, has more faith in the Virgin of Guadalupe than she does in the Virgin Mary. She sees the Virgin Mary as a kind of bully, as a kind of big shot in the panoply of virgins, that she's not leaving room for the more indigenous virgin, which Lupe identifies with the Guadalupe Virgin. And the statue of the Virgin Mary in the Jesuit temple is so overwhelmingly huge that Lupe calls it the merry monster, to be further derogatory. The dump boss, who I told you about before, poor old Rivera, he is disparaged by the children early on as a Mary worshiper. He's into Mary. And they speak of poor Rivera in derogatory terms as a Mary worshiper. Well, the religious mystery on which this novel is based has to do with the Virgin Mary proving herself. The Virgin Mary is going to win them over. She's going to show them that she can do something, even to the degree or to the point that near the end of the Mexican story, when the dump boss, Rivera, is leaving the temple, he points to the statue of the Virgin Mary and looks at the two old priests. And he tells them, I come here for her, not for you. Well, I would say this novel is more about the miraculous, or what is the most extraordinary thing about religious faith, which is most people who have it have to keep it without being shown a miracle. They have to believe on those miracles that happened too long ago for them to see. They have to keep believing without the evidence. But in this novel, I kind of help the side of faith, or at least one of these children's faith, by having the Virgin Mary actually do something new, as if she hadn't already done enough. Yet Juan Diego's disparagement of the Catholic Church, not Mary, but the man-made policies of that church, continue to rub him the wrong way. That's not a contradiction to his faith. That's not a contradiction to what he believes. And all I want to say, without giving too much away, is that the sex is an attendant part of the story, as is comedy, as is things that are funny, inappropriately so at times, as is the sex, inappropriate, more than once.
More than once. Do you know what you think about the idea of moral certainty?
I think it's absurd. There's another lesson to be had, perhaps, in this novel, that I kind of went out of my way to make the most doctrinaire representatives of religion or faith foolish, but no less foolish and no less empty of answers is the man of science, Dr. Vargas, the atheist, who is also made by what happens to look like a fool. I've always thought that absolute believers, proselytizers who want you to believe what they believe, have a lot in common with atheists, which they both would deny. But they have a lot in common. And here's what's the same about them. They're both telling us something absolutely that they can't possibly know. They haven't died and come back and reported to us on what's there. That's what faith takes. You believe it or you don't. But I'm uncomfortable around people who are absolutely certain about it. That's why the religious mysteries are called mysteries. That's why faith requires so much of you, is that you are expected to believe in something that you can't be shown, in something that can't be proved. I just find that both the most ardent proselytizers and the most outspoken atheists are talking about something that nobody knows. That's all. Frankly, that's just an empirical observation. They can't know it, so leave me alone. That's all. It's not complicated.
Has what you believe changed over the years when it comes to religious faith?
Once again, I don't look upon myself, my own boring experience, or what I believe as very important. I go back and forth about what I believe. I suppose I'm a very normal and wishy-washy agnostic. Some years I believe more than others. Some years I don't know what I believe. Some years I have more doubt. I don't feel it's anybody's business. And I'm certainly not, well, let's put it this way. I believe wholeheartedly in freedom of religion, but I also believe, as some people have forgotten, that it's a two-way street. Yes, we are free and should be free to believe in and practice the religion of our choice, but we also should be free from having someone else's religion practiced on us. That's the two-way part of the street, which many people don't regard.
What do you think about the way religion, in the kind of political season that we're in, creeps into politics?
Creeps into politics? How about suggesting that it lives there? It's already inhabited there. I think it's nauseating. It's tiresome. Last time I looked, we weren't a theocracy, but you can't tell that to everyone.
You live in Canada now. That doesn't happen in Canada. Not for the reasons we're talking about.
No,
Right.
you have to be careful. People believe in God in Canada. Gee.
Right. But that doesn't happen in Canada, in the politics, does it?
Well, I've lived in Canada for more than 30 years, but most of that time has been part-time. For 30 years, I've lived in Canada as much as 3 or 4 months of the year, sometimes 4 or 5. But for most of that time, my primary residence has still been in the United States until last winter, when, for reasons that have nothing to do with politics or religion, I got tired of living in a big ski house in Vermont when my kids were all grown up and my grandchildren were now all of school age, and nobody came back to the house to ski anymore. And it just seemed like a excessive thing to have this big house that was difficult, increasingly so, for my kids and grandkids to get to. And we were more and more getting together with each other in places that were easier to get to. And it was just too much of a house for my wife and me to be in most of the time by ourselves. Also, I haven't lived in a city full-time since I lived in New York for most of the 80s. Most of that decade I lived in New York City. And there are things I don't miss about it. That is New York City in particular and city life in general. But there also, over time, have been things I've missed about living full-time in a city. And it's mostly for considerations of travel. If I live full-time in Toronto, I can go see my kids wherever they are more easily. Half of my life as a writer is in translation. Half of my income as a writer is from translations. I have to be abroad a lot, and I'm just tired of going everywhere from a town in the mountains in Vermont. And last but not least, after my 3rd knee surgery, the downhill skiing wasn't as much fun. Or let's just say that I had to ski in such a way that kind of like making bad things happen. If you have to ski that carefully, why do it? There's not much fun in that. So for a lot of reasons, my wife and I decided we should be in Toronto all the time. But it has been an interesting experience to be a new immigrant at my age. I'll always be an American. I'll always be a U.S. citizen, but I will eventually be a dual citizen. And I now have my permanent resident card, which is the Canadian equivalent of a green card. I'm on the Ontario health plan. It's different. It's taken me a while to figure out how the parliamentary system works. The last time I looked at English history, I was 17 years old, so I had to brush up on how that works. But it was pretty exciting the other night to be in Toronto for, forgive my politics showing, for a landslide Liberal victory. I liked Mr. Trudeau's father, too. So that was kind of fun.
So that'll be exciting.
That was kind of
See
fun.
what happens.
I live in Midtown Toronto, and it was pretty, people were pretty excited. It was fun.
You, at the beginning of the discussion, said that the novel had started as something else. And then you talked a little bit about how long some of these ideas, how long it takes for some of them to come to fruition. And I was reading something that you told the Paris Review years ago. A writer is a vehicle. I feel the story I'm writing existed before I existed. I'm just the slob who finds it and rather clumsily tries to do it. You know, and I was having a conversation with Elizabeth Gilbert a couple weeks ago about this, and she's out with a new book called The Big Magic. And it's all about kind of what you said there, this idea that these ideas for stories are democratic, small d, and they float around and they land on the writer that is receptive and ready to tell them. And that kind of sounds like what you were saying in the Paris Review years ago.
I don't think I would use the slob word today. Well, revision is what I do most of the time, you know. Well, this novel had an unusual beginning in a way, in that it had a previous life for years and years, which began truly 25 years ago, more than. It began its life as a screenplay. I should say something about a particular way I feel about movies. I've been writing screenplays or lots of ideas for stories as screenplays before I might choose to write that idea in expanded form as a novel, because the director, Irving Kershner, who was going to make a film of my first novel, Setting Free the Bears, he and I worked for a year on that film in Vienna. And Columbia Pictures pulled the plug on us, and we never got to make it. And they still own it. And that was devastating to us at the time, but it was a great thing to be taught how to do. It would turn out to be more useful to me than I imagined at that time. Many years ago, when I was living in New York, one of my closest friends was the photographer Mary Ellen Mark, who died just recently in May. And she and her husband, the British-born filmmaker Martin Bell, were among my closest friends in New York. And Mary Ellen showed me some photographs that she'd taken of children in an Indian circus, child performers there. And Martin proposed that, knowing that risk to children was an obsession of mine, certainly so in this novel, not for the first time, Martin said, "We thought you should come to India and see what these children do and what the circumstances of their lives are that the circus is saving them from if they don't die at the circus." Martin knew that I would, speaking of worst-case scenarios, that I would be interested in that dilemma for a child. That they had essentially two terrible options. What makes being a child performer in an Indian circus so dangerous? Well, many of the high wire acts are performed by children. And in most of those circuses, all of the circuses I ever saw in India, there is no safety net. So just begin with that. Well, Martin and I couldn't get our movie made in India because the Indian government has a board of censors. And especially in the case of foreign-made films, the board of censors asks itself principally this question: does this put India in a bad light? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it did. So, given that as their principle, I completely understand why they kept turning us down and left us no option but to lie about the story or fabricate what we were doing. And I don't take well to censorship, anybody's. And so we bagged it in India. We said no. And Mary Ellen moved on. She found children in circuses in Mexico. And pretty soon, we were in India together in the winter of 1990. I first went to Mexico with Martin and Mary Ellen in 97 to look at the first circuses with child performers I saw in Mexico. I went again 2008, 2009, 2011, 2014. And for much of this time, it was, quote unquote, only a film, right? Only a film. The Mexican transmutation was very good. The Jesuits, who were always a part of the story, had much more of a presence in Mexico. The Catholic Church has been much more successful in Mexico than it's ever managed to be in India. And here was the thing we didn't know until we'd gone and looked at a number of circuses. We didn't know until we spent a lot of time in India that the work that's done in the dump, the basurero, is done by children. The picking and sorting through various materials to be compartmentalized is done by children. It always has been. Even back in 1970, which is when our story is set in Mexico, the picking and the sorting was done by children. Niños de la basura, they're called. Children of the rubbish. Dump kids. The kids are the workers. They're also called los pepenadores, the scavengers. That's what they do. That's their job. That has not changed. The fires have changed. In 1970, they burned everything that would burn, everything. Now there are many restrictions regarding what you can burn, but the kids are the ones who do the work. They wear big, thick, knee-high rubber boots, for the most part, to protect them from all the discarded needles. You don't want to get pricked by those. It's risky business. So is hanging upside down by a trapeze by your feet at 80 feet with no net. Take your pick. Nice corner, huh? So that was our story. And for a long time, I thought that's what we're doing. We're trying to get a movie made. But something happened in that story that got the what-if part of my imagination going. At age 14, Juan Diego meets an American draft dodger.
He's a boy on the lam. He's running away. He's not in good shape. He's a wreck. But to a 14-year-old, this young man in his 20s seems like a kind of hero. He's not a hero. He's a mess. He's a sweet kid, but he's in trouble. He's all messed up. But he's also big into the mezcal, and he's not so slowly killing himself. And one night, they take him off the street and hide him in the orphanage where the Jesuits have taken them from their life as dump kids. And in the morning, in the bathtub where they're trying to clean up this unfortunate hippie, the young draft dodger extracts a promise from Juan Diego. He always wanted to go to the Philippines to visit the vast memorial and cemetery for all the Americans who were killed in the Philippines in World War II, this boy's father among them. And he says to Juan Diego, this kid, he's called the good gringo. This kid says, if I can't go there, maybe one day you'll go for me. And Juan Diego says, yes. I always loved that scene in the script. And one day, I guess I read it too many times. And I thought, well, what if he did? What if 40 years later, we see this man still limping, and he's on his way to the Philippines to make good on his promise to this lost soul in a bathtub? Well, I had my own plans for what would happen to Juan Diego in the Philippines, beyond his absurd keeping of this absurd promise. And from that moment on, it became a novel, which is why it was so quickly forthcoming in the writing, because I'd already written the Mexican part. I had already written his childhood and adolescence and the Jesuits and all the business about the dump kids. What makes the Jesuits interested in Juan Diego? There's lots of dump kids. They're not interested in all of them. He has taught himself to read by the dumps, by the dumps' principal fire starters, which are books. Books are burned in the dump to start fires. People throw books away, and they're burned in the dump. And in 1970, they started all the fires with the books. So Juan Diego has taught himself to read in the books he's taken out of the dump. The Jesuits hear about this and say, the Jesuits have always had a commendable and preternatural these days interest in education. They're interested in this kid. He's a little bit of a miracle to them. And so they decide he needs rescuing because he's a self-taught reader.
This sounds like a good place for the excerpt, the last excerpt. Would that be all right?
Yes.
We're kind of right up to that part of the novel.
This also speaks a little bit to what I was talking about earlier, about there being a difference between the church, that is the institution, and what is miraculous about religion. There is mention of a man with an English name, Edward Bonshaw. He's a new missionary. He's a newly arrived Jesuit who the dump kids love. He's a teacher at the orphanage, and they call him Senor Eduardo. His name is Edward Bonshaw. There's a little bit of Edward in here. This is very short. I'm not much of a believer, Juan Diego had once told Edward Bonshaw, but that had been a 14-year-old talking. At first, it was easier for the dump kid to say he wasn't much of a believer than it would have been for him to articulate his distrust of the Catholic Church, especially to as likable a scholastic in training to be a priest as Senor Eduardo. Don't say that, Juan Diego. You're too young to cut yourself off from belief, Edward Bonshaw had said. In truth, it was not belief that Juan Diego lacked. Most dump kids are seekers of miracles. At least Juan Diego wanted to believe in the miraculous, in all sorts of inexplicable mysteries. Even if he doubted the miracles, the church wanted everyone to believe those pre-existing miracles, the ones dulled by time. What the dump reader doubted was the church. Most dump kids are believers. Maybe you have to believe in something when you see so many discarded things. And Juan Diego knew what every dump kid and every orphan knows. Every last thing thrown away, every person or thing that isn't wanted may have been wanted once, or in different circumstances might have been wanted. The dump reader had saved books from burning, and he'd actually read the books. Don't ever think a dump reader is incapable of belief. It takes an eternity to read some books, even or especially some books saved from burning.
Never gonna hold my breath for something I can't change. Waiting for a silver spoon that'll never come my way. Hard work and a little luck have gotten me this far, and hopefully with a little more I'll end up where you are. I'm looking forward and I can't see straight. Nothing seems black and white, just living day to day. And I'm standing between the old and the new. One foot is on that line, the other is back with you. Brick lane's gonna mend my soul, gonna keep me warm. So I've been told you're gonna keep me tonight. Oh, tonight, hey. Broken heart is forced to pump, even when it hurts. So keep this man alive tonight. Someday it's bound to work, and the lesson learned the hard way, I learned it all the same. Always take your time with love, never shoot before you aim. I'm looking forward tonight, tonight.
The Bellows. Okay, have you chosen a few of the submitted audience questions that you will entertain?
Either that or they've chosen me. Yeah. I keep putting them in different order.
I was
But
noticing
no matter
that.
how many times I do that, well, never mind. This first one isn't really a question. It's a comment, but I appreciate it. And my mother, if she were alive and were she here, would appreciate it. This is from a doctor who says, I'm a GYN cancer surgeon, and during OB/GYN training encountered lots of unplanned pregnancies. This is a huge reality. You are one of the few authors to mention, let alone really write about abortion and unplanned pregnancy. What an emotional and complex subject. Thank you for tackling it. Thank you. My mom was an advocate for abortion rights before people were very vociferously advocating for it. She was a nurse's aide and later was a counselor in a family counseling service, a county facility in New Hampshire. Most of that counseling included domestic violence, which almost always meant violence to women or children, and which included many unwanted pregnancies. Do you have a favorite death you've written about? Oh, you know me so well. Yes. Dr. Larch in the Cider House Rules is an ether addict, and I did a lot of work on ether addiction. And that death means a lot to me. But not, I think, as much as Owen Meany's death means to me. So I put Owen's death slightly ahead of Dr. Larch's, but there really are two, because I think my very favorite death is in this novel, is in Avenue of Mysteries. But there's enough death in it that I won't tell you who. That is, I won't tell you which one. But there's one that means, I think, more to me in terms of architecture, in terms of craft, in terms of setting it up,
right? That's how it means more to me. I don't mean emotionally more to me. When you've lived with something for 12 or 15 years before you finish it, maybe the emotional reasons you had for doing it, you don't feel them anymore. It's just a matter of strategy. It's a matter of technique then. So when I say favorite, or I'm talking about technique. I'm not talking about moved me most, because by the time I finish a novel, nothing moves me.
Jeez.
Yeah, I've lived with it too damn long.
Is that really true?
Yes. Oh, good. Here's a more lighthearted question. What is your favorite city you've lived in? Why? Well, until I lived in Toronto sometime, I probably would have said Vienna. But you know, I think when you answer that question about what's your favorite house or what's your favorite city, or you have to be honest and recognize that it has a lot to do with your happiness or lack thereof at a time, and you can't hold necessarily a city accountable for that, or any place. I lived, as I told you earlier, I lived in New York for almost a decade, and it isn't New York's fault that I was largely unhappy, principally with myself, in those years I lived there. I can't blame New York for that. One of my sons lives there now. He loves it. I love going there to see him. So I can't blame New York for that. But so when I say New York isn't a favorite city of mine, what I'm really talking about is me, not New York. I loved Vienna when I lived there. But when I've gone back there occasionally, as I have on various German language book tours, I don't love it so much. But when I was a student there, when I was working on my first screenplay there, when my middle son, Brendan, was born there, it seemed pretty special in those years. But I scrutinize it a little differently now. So I have to pick Toronto because I've never been unhappy there. And I do love it there. But that may have more to do with things outside or beyond Toronto. What's your secret to continuing to get better with age?
I see why you chose that one.
I told you at the beginning, it chose me.
Yes, that's right.
Well, thank you very much for thinking so. Not much does get better with age. I don't think it's a secret, but I do have a plan. And that is, honestly, to write shorter, progressively shorter novels. I didn't say short. I said shorter. To write shorter novels and to write even more slowly than I always have.
How's that plan going?
It's going. It's working so far. It's working. And here's a comment with a question tacked on. First of all, I blame your books for my mediocre college grades. No, I won't say anything about the kind of people who always have to blame someone else. I was too busy
reading them and not focusing on what I should have been reading. Maybe you should have been reading my books, so I'm not being argumentative here. What is your favorite book of yours? P.S. I love you.
Does anybody want to
Look,
own that?
you better slow
comment out
down.
there?
Just slow down. Let's leave it with what is your favorite book of yours. Let's just go that far, shall we? You know, I don't always say it's the one I've just finished. Honestly, I don't. But I do feel that way right now about this one. And if you ask me that 4 or 5 years from now, maybe I wouldn't say it. I don't really have a favorite. What I say to everyone is this. I didn't become a full-time writer, that is, a self-supporting writer, a writer who wasn't chiefly supporting himself by teaching English and coaching wrestling, which I imagined I would always be doing. That's what I imagined I would be doing, and I didn't dislike those things. I like those things a lot. But with my 4th novel, I became self-supporting as a writer. And with my 6th novel, which was The Cider House Rules, I had taught myself to write for 7 or 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I feel it's a great luxury for a writer to be able to do that, just to be self-supporting and to not have to, as many writers do, write their work in the 2 hours a day they can scrounge from needing to support themselves by other means. I feel lucky that it didn't happen to me overnight, because I'll never take it for granted. And so I feel that all of my books, beginning with the 6th one, which is Cider House, all of my books beginning with the 6th one, up to and including the 14th, are better made. They're better constructed than any of the first 5. Now, that doesn't mean that you're wrong to like one of the first 5 better than all the rest. I'm speaking like the tailor who makes the suit. I know it's better made. It doesn't mean what you might like to wear. I'm talking about construction. If what you do, you get to do full time, you should do it better. And I feel I have. Have you read Nicholas Nickleby yet? Or are you still, quotes, saving it? Well, that's almost true, but it's not Nickleby. I've read Nickleby a couple of times. The one I'm saving for my deathbed, if I'm so lucky, the one Dickens novel I have put off reading because I want to have one Dickens novel I haven't read left to read, is Our Mutual Friend. And I have not yet read it. If I'm so lucky as to be told I'm dying of something, if that's the way it happens, I'll start reading it. It's kind of a long book. So I hope I get a little time.
So you'd prefer it be slow, a drawn-out death, than a sudden death?
I keep trying to make the point to you that real life and fiction don't have
get it.
much to do with
But
you.
that answer,
Yeah, okay. So you think I'd rather be hit by a bus, but then I wouldn't get to read
Right.
Our Mutual Friend. And there's the argument to start it now. Okay. 2 more, and fortunately, because I'm sure we're all very tired, especially you. Unfortunately, these are really easy. These are short. These are short answers. I don't do short answers. You may have noticed. But I saved the short answers until last, just to do you a favor and wake you up. You know, I'm looking at a few tops of heads out there already. So.
No way.
Yeah,
Everybody's
way.
wide
Yeah,
awake and
way.
still with us, aren't you?
Yeah, way.
All right, good.
Which performance did you enjoy most? Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler or Jack Black in Nacho Libre? Are you kidding? It's Mickey Rourke all the way. This looks like suspiciously the same handwriting. This is kind of an inside joke, but I think some of you will know what it means. Fireman's high crotch or ankle pick? Well, I had a really lousy fireman's, and every time I tried to hit a fireman's on someone, I got flattened. So it wouldn't be that. And my ankle pick was marginally better than my high crotch. But so among those three, I'd have to pick the ankle pick. But my two favorite moves, or the ones I seem to get beaten up for doing less, were the duck under and the arm drag. So I go duck under or arm drag. But among these three, I'll take the ankle pick every day. Thank you. I just have one thing to say privately. If you stay where you are, Jay, someone will find you.